Cresselia is a legendary Pokemon that was released back in Gen 4, and despite looking very good at a glance with its excellent defensive stats, decent speed, the always useful ability Levitate, and a good move pool, Cresselia has always been significantly weaker than most of its fellow legendaries. In its debut generation, while it is a viable choice in OU, it's pretty rarely seen, and beyond Gen 4 it has ranked below OU every time. Cresselia's mono-psychic typing has always been quite detrimental. In generations 4 to 7, the presence of Tyranitar and its powerful Pursuit are basically a global nerf to all ghost and psychic types. A weakness to U-turn, one of the most common moves in competitive singles, doesn't help either, and life really got difficult in Gen 6 with the buffing of Knockoff and subsequent rise of even more central Dark-type threats. Although Pursuit was removed from the game in Gen 8, Dark types remained common, and this also only served to buff Ghost types further. Life became even more difficult for psychic types in this generation. For defensive psychic types like Cresselia to keep up, usually they need to really make up for it in other areas, like Reuniclus in Gen 5, who had the very powerful ability Magic Guard, and also Focus Blast to at least fend off Tyranitar a little bit. Defensive Mew sets have also been successful in some generations, despite the shortcomings of mono psychic type, due to Mew's useful utility moves like Defog and Will-O-Wisp. But Cresselia doesn't have an overpowered ability, or these crucial moveset options to give it that reason to be used. It is seen occasionally as a Trick Room setter, and on Sun teams thanks to Moonlight, which provides massive healing. But for the most part, Cresselia has struggled and been outclassed over the years. But now in Gen 9, Cresselia has recently returned and has seen perhaps the most success of its career. In the most recent tier shift, Cresselia rose from UU up to OU, a pretty massive rise from its NUBL position just last generation. What could be the reason behind Cresselia suddenly shooting up to the moon like this? Let's take a look. But first, a non-important update. The Pokemon Iron Mugulis, despite its controversial reputation and repeated crimes against humanity, has actually not done anything of note for approximately 14 days. It's been an uneventful couple of weeks for everyone's least favorite Pokemon, but you can never be too careful, folks. I would still urge you all to like this video and subscribe to the channel for your own safety. Thank you. Cresselia's viability has improved in Gen 9, in part because of some mechanical changes and differences in the metagame compared to other gens. Moonlight is Cresselia's best healing move, and it only has 8 PP, which in previous games made it much worse than other options like Recover or Soft Boiled. In Gen 9, however, all recovery moves across the board have been nerfed to have 8 PP, and Moonlight has remained the same, leveling the playing field for Cresselia a little bit. Moonlight also heals for different amounts depending on the weather effect in play. In Gen 5, this was particularly damning for Cresselia, as rain and sand were the two most prominent weather effects, and both of these nerfed Moonlight's healing to only 1/4. Although rain teams are occasionally seen in Gen 9, they're not quite as prevalent as they once were, and sand is non-existent in the current OU metagame, with Tyranitar dropping significantly in viability. These are some positive developments for Cresselia, but there's still the issues of its mono-psychic typing. Despite great defensive stats, Dark and Ghost remain some of the format's most common offensive types. Cresselia is also vulnerable to status, and lacks great abilities like Regenerator or Unaware that give other defensive Pokemon in the format valuable utility and staying power. But as we all know, in Gen 9, if your typing is bad, you can simply transform into a different type, thanks to everybody's favorite mechanic, Terastalization. I'm sure we all remember the Emu Pokemon, who had access to the combination of Calm Mind, Stored Power, and Speed Boost, who through Terastalization could solidify its sweeps by gaining important coverage options or resistances. Stored Power is a move that gains 20 base power for every boost you have, scaling to pretty ridiculous levels very quickly, even allowing the Emu to outdamage unaware Pokemon and power through just about anything. Cresselia may not have Speed Boost like the Emu, but it's doing pretty much the same thing, and its excellent defensive stats certainly help it get the ball rolling. Cresselia has access to Calm Mind, Stored Power, and Moonlight, and thanks to Tera, it can transform into a powerful defensive type, or give itself coverage with Tera Blast to make it harder to eliminate and often secure a win. Clodsire, with its ability Unaware to ignore Calm Mind boosts and also Toxic to put Cresselia on a clock, seems like a pretty good response. But players have realized that with Terastalized Poison, you can completely 1v1 Clodsire, gaining a poison immunity and also cancelling out the ground ground weakness of poison thanks to your ability Levitate. Stored power will eventually scale up enough to threaten Clodsire with lethal damage. Moonblast is a good coverage option to hit dark types super effectively since they are immune to stored power. But this means steel types can be effective against you, with their resistance to both psychic and fairy. King Gambit in particular is a problem for Cresselia, with its dark steel typing meaning it's immune to stored power and can shrug off Moonblast well enough, and then threaten to KO you with its powerful stat moves. But Cresselia is well researched in the events of the Great Emu War, and is well aware that emus would terastalize fighting to solve this very issue. Tera fighting provides a valuable resistance to dark, and lets you threaten King Gambit and any other dark or steel type trying to stop you. Covert Cloak can even be used to restrict counterplay to Cresselia even further, now making it immune to the secondary effects of moves, such as Ironhead's flinch effect, or Salt Cure's damage over time effect. This is yet another example of Terastalization allowing snowbally boost sweepers to overcome their usual counterplay and run away with games. A sentiment I see a lot in the Pokemon community and in my comments sections is that people seem to care more about whether their favorite Pokemon is viable or not, rather than what the Pokemon actually does, its role in the metagame, and the reason why it's even viable in the first place. Although Cresselia is more viable now than it ever has been, I don't even view this Cresselia as the same Pokemon it once was. Cresselia was never a premier choice in the past, but it had its merit here and there. It had niche options like Skill Swap that could catch ability-reliant Pokemon, such as Gliscor or Clefable off guard. Sun teams could use Cresselia in Gen 5, since Moonlight is greatly enhanced in the sun. Cresselia would see these occasional niche uses, due to its legitimately distinct qualities that set it apart from other Pokemon in the same role. It may be more viable now than it ever has been, but we've seen so many boost sweeping win conditions that use Tera to become some generically strong defensive type or gain coverage. This may be an instance of Terastalization buffing a Pokemon that was worse in the past, but now Cresselia is just yet another Tera sweeper that has lost the distinct identity it once had. I think this is an example of Terastalization making the game less interesting, not more interesting. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Are you enjoying Cresselia's new surge in popularity and viability? Are you sick of your team getting destroyed by Cresselia? What would you like me to talk about next? Let me know down below in the comments. And thank you for watching. Thank you to the patrons. Become a patron to appear on this excellent end screen, alongside your favorite Pokemon.
The money got different, 'cause of what I'm spending. The money got different.
Oh, it's
'Cause of what I'm
Megaphone!
spending.
Whoa!
The money
KO'd
got
by one
different.
hit! It
'Cause
scattered
of what I'm
spikes!
spending. The money got different. 'Cause of what I'm spending.